You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Janet Allen, who on the list of people I have met in my time as an adult in Indianapolis, no one is kinder, sweeter, easier to laugh, and more fun to make laugh than Janet Allen. She recently announced her retirement as co-CEO at the Indiana Repertory Theater after nearly 40 years of service. Janet, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome, Robert. No one has ever described me as sweet. I'm probably the least sweet person you know, but you're kind to pick that word.
You are a diabetes carrier because you're just sweet as pie. I've never had an interaction with you that didn't involve a hug and didn't involve a really earnest and fun and sincere conversation. First, let me, on behalf of the podcast, congratulate you on your retirement and ask why, after nearly 40 years, have you decided to step away?
Well, Robert, for all I think the right reasons, I'm ready for some new chapters of my life. And I very much believe the IRT is ready for a new chapter as well. So those are real good. Those are the right moments, when it's time for a leader to recognize that it's time to retire. And I think that's an important aspect of leadership, is knowing when it's time to step away, and also to let the institution that you've worked for and with for a long time just fly on to the next thing. So that's what I'm doing.
What drew you to the IRT in the first place?
That is such a wild question. The IRT has been my work and artistic home for virtually all of my career. I started at the IRT right out of graduate school at IU. I then took a little break and moved to New York and freelanced. And then I had the opportunity to come back to the IRT as an associate artistic director. And I was one of those Midwestern kids who thought, as a theater maker, we had to spend some time in New York. And I'm very glad I did, Robert. But boy, did I realize I was a Midwesterner when I lived in New York. And very basic things really perplexed me about New York. I love to visit New York. I just got back from there. I saw Broadway shows for the first time in 3 years, which was so emotional. But I discovered that I was a Midwestern person. So the opportunity to come back to the IRT and serve it for another 35 years after I lived in New York was really a beautiful thing for me. It's very rare in our industry, Robert, now that people serve a single institution for as long as I have. Mm-hmm. That's really going to be a huge generational shift. I imagine it is in other fields, but it certainly is in the theater. These long tenures are not even in vogue or wanted anymore. So the change it up theory is a lot more beckoning, I think, to our field. And I get that. And I am so ready to make way for the next wave.
You mentioned you were a Midwestern girl. Did you have a chance to go to other theaters or arts organizations within the Midwest?
I did, but I grew up, I was born in Chicago, but I was raised in Central Illinois where there was no professional theater, but there was university theater. So I actually started making theater in high school before I'd seen very much professional theater. I'd seen the occasional roadshow of a musical, but I knew musicals were not where I would probably settle in my own career of art making. And sure enough, I didn't. So, I had, as many kids still have in the Midwest, very little exposure to professional arts of any kind. And that's that's one of the things that has mattered a lot to me, Robert, is being part of making professional art-going experiences for kids across the Midwest and adults too, of course, to be able to see those things right at home in their home states.
One of the kind of coolest things that you can see downtown, I live in Fountain Square, so I ride my bike around downtown quite a bit, or driving past or walking, is when you preamble by the IRT and see all the yellow school buses parked on Washington Street.
Yeah.
To what you just said, what's that like? How fun is that? I know Christmas Carol gets a lot of attention, but other plays as well when the kids come in and you get a chance to talk with them and they get exposed to something, to your point, that is not very common.
Yeah, it is one of the most sort of heart-swelling and rewarding parts of my job. The IRT is unlike a lot of its peer theaters, and we collective bargain with a group of 76 theaters around the country. And we are one of the few who do a very large percentage of our service to children. In fact, our mission is based upon 40% of our performance schedule being aimed at children. That's a huge percentage, Robert, for most of our peers. There are fully youth-serving theaters or family-serving theaters, but we are not that. We serve both. So I love looking at all the yellow school buses. I love the questions the kids ask. Sometimes it's as much a reward, it's more of a reward for me to listen to them talk in post-show discussions and ask questions as it is to listen to them watch the play. Because for so many kids, this is an awakening. It may be an awakening to a piece of history they never understood. It might be an awakening to somebody who they have learned to believe is the other, whether it is an other racially or religiously or economically. So we really think of that as a mind expanding experience for kids. It is particularly powerful for kids of color, even more so now, to see their stories on stage, not just white stories. So there's just so many ways in which the experience for kids is super deep. COVID shut down our service to kids for a year and a half. It was horrible. It was the most horrible part of our experience of COVID. This past season, we did have students coming back, and teachers were hungry to bring kids back to the theater, which we were really gratified by, but it'll be a slow build. It will, because teachers, like everybody else, are still overwhelmed with trying to keep kids focused on curriculum and healthy. So it's going to be a long growth back.
You mentioned an awakening that may happen when school-age kids come to the IRT. Did you have that same awakening when you were a kid?
I did, but it was more kind of an awakening to the transportation of the form, Robert. My most memorable childhood theater experience was actually in an amateur theater in Chicago, where a friend of my father's was directing a production of Carousel, big Rodgers and Hammerstein historic musical. And what is so memorable to me is I was sitting close to an aisle, and the actor playing Billy Bigelow, the lead, the carny guy, walked down the aisle singing, and every hair on my body rose. I guess I had no idea that performers could ever be that close to you or feel real, or that it would be that electric moment of somebody walking by you singing in a character. I was completely blown away. So yes, I did have some of those moments as a kid.
You mentioned your love of the arts. So as someone who can do literally nothing artistically.
Oh, that's not true.
Or mechanically.
That
I'm trying
might
to think.
True.
Or automotively. I'm trying to run down the list of the skills where I simply have nothing. My kids always make fun of me because my tools remain shiny years and years after I buy them. What was your particular talent in terms of art? Drawing, dancing, singing, painting?
I'm going to first take you on that you can do nothing artful. And this is a misprision of what art is. So I'm just going to school you for a minute, Robert. You're going to have to live with it.
I can appreciate it. Does that count as a skill?
Absolutely. But also, and this is where and I think this is a kind of a Midwestern malaise, or maybe an American one, I'm not sure. We're taught to believe that art has to be special and different. But actually, art is all around you every single day. It's what you choose to put on in the morning. It's what you choose to cook or eat. It's what you choose to hang on your walls. It's what you choose to listen to or see, or what movies you care about. All that is art. We have art around us all the time. It's just whether we recognize that or not. So it's what you're attracted to on the street, what books you read, all that stuff is art. So I'm busy trying to break down those barriers of believing that art is rarefied and special. It's not. It's part of your life.
Is there a specialness though when it comes to, without fussing with you, because I wouldn't do that, because then I would get the beat down, and I try not to get those on my own podcast. Is there something about a special talent that draws you to a certain aspect of art?
Yeah, that wasn't a way true for me, but it was truer about what my parents led me to, Robert. Okay, my mother had been a dancer as a kid, and she took us to dance lessons. My father was a musician, a choir director, and a bunch of stuff like that. So he wanted us to learn to play piano. So I had exposure in terms of musculature of trying to learn those things as a little kid, long before I knew anything about theater. So those were ways in. I didn't stay in either of those forms. I am certainly not a dancer, and I no longer play the piano, although I hope to remind myself in retirement. But it was an exposure for me. I was taken by my parents because they cared about these things. So I sucked that up. You probably did that with your kids about lots of things.
You just, basically what I would say to that is, after a certain period of time, I said to both of my kids, well, I have 3 children, but the 2 who lived with me at the time, I simply cannot take Radio Disney any longer.
Yeah.
I can't take Caillou or some god-awful kids cartoon. So I showed them Robin Hood with Errol Flynn and other movies, Star Wars, and started listening to the Beatles and stuff like that. I'm like, it's time to go beyond all these things. And actually, it was Bastille Day, July 14th, 2013. I took my kids, Andrew and Anna, to go see Paul McCartney. And it was here in Indianapolis, and it was eye-opening for them. How has music, so much of what the IRT involves music one way or the other. Let's stick with that theme for just a second. Sure. How has music changed your life, shaped your life, and how has it helped propel the IRT into the place it has in Indianapolis's and Indiana's cultural arts pantheon?
That's a big one. I grew up listening to a lot of different kinds of music. My parents were very eclectic in their musical tastes, and they were luckily very open to all that early rock stuff. So there was no, you can't listen to that. They listened to what we listened to very freely. The one musical tradition that I did not grow up with, and I'm sorry that I didn't, is opera. I have no affinity for opera. I don't know anything about it. I go from time to time, but it just wasn't early in my life, I think, enough for me to feel like that was part of my chaptering in music. The reason that as you probably know, the IRT does not do many musicals, and we don't because of market saturation. There's 2 roadhouses here that bring Broadway musicals in. The Tarkington, oh my goodness, there's so many. Footlight, there's so many wonderful avocational theaters, community theaters, as well as the Broadway series here, where you can see massive musicals. So more for us, it's been about plays infused with music in one way or another, sometimes played live, often not. And composers, in fact, I've just gotten out of a day-long meeting with a composer. Composers are some of the most mysterious and prized artists to me. I get what an actor does because I work with them all the time. But lights and sound are big mysteries to me and so transporting emotionally that they are super key collaborators for us. I love that part of the form. So we revere them and we employ them and we hope that they will lift the work that we're making always.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest is Janet Allen. She's the Margot Lacey Eccles Artistic Director of the Indiana Repertory Theater. She recently announced her retirement after nearly 40 years of service. She's a wonderful friend and a true Hoosier champion of the arts and beyond that. When you see a play like Hamilton that just becomes a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, does that warm your heart and make you feel more optimistic about the future of the arts?
Absolutely. And I will say that, some of the things that I heard about Hamilton before I ever saw it, Robert, first, thank you for those lovely compliments. They're very kind and very over the top. The first things I heard, like hip hop, like I thought I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it. This is not for my generation. But my children, my two youngest children, said, "Oh, please, can't we go?" And I, being a fairly parsimonious theater goer, said, "We will go." This was years ago now, Robert. I don't even know how many. I said, "I will go when you guys can find tickets for under $100." Well, that's, at that point, they were going for $300 and $400 on Broadway. But the Chicago sit down of Hamilton was about to start. And sure enough, it took them not very long, with their fingers dancing over the keyboards, to find tickets for under $100. So the four of us went. We had been listening to the music for a while. I begrudgingly, I will say, because I thought, I'm not going to get this. And I very quickly started falling in love with the music. And of course, falling in love with my children's captivation by it. And my kids can now both sing. They're 22 and 25. My younger two can sing the whole score and have been able to for years. So I will say I was utterly beguiled by it when I saw it. I've seen it twice. I saw the version on TV and loved it for very different reasons, because it explodes the backstage of the production so beautifully. It totally gives me hope, Robert, because it's a reinvention of musicals. The same way Hair was, and Rent was, and Spring Awakening was. All these, in fact, I just saw Strange Loop last week in New York, which is the Tony Award sweep winner of the year. It owes so much to Hamilton. And you just see these seeds of progress being handed off from composer and lyricist and book writer to the next. And it's dreamy to see that.
Is Indianapolis's reputation nationwide? Is Indianapolis's reputation as an arts community stronger now than it's ever been? And even if it isn't, how much has it changed or grown since you started at the IRT back when Bill Hudnut was mayor?
Wow, that's a complicated question, Robert. I would say right now it's not, because COVID decimated the performing arts here and everywhere. So all of us are making less work than we did 3 years ago or 30 years ago. And I don't think we quite yet know what the long-term impact of performing arts is going to be yet, what the COVID long-term impact is. Obviously, it changed a lot of people's viewing tastes and also mechanisms. It gave us all this, okay, we have to stay at home. We're going to consume a lot of media arts, and a lot of us got very comfortable doing that. So I think we're at a really perilous time to answer that question. There have been junctures when I've been worried about our national reputation, and when this may not be exactly what you were asking me, Robert, but I'm talking about reputation among artists. Okay. There have been times when that reputation has been negatively impacted by various pieces of legislation that were viewed and are viewed as negative to artists, and particularly negative to diverse people or queer people, or, a lot of our field is very open-armed. And we have historically, and I mean 2,000 years of history, we have been a field where people who might be considered outside voices or outcasts, that's a very value-laden word, but people who don't fit in maybe can be heard, can have voice.
Outcasts, not through their actions, but through the attitudes of others.
That's excellent. Thank you for that context. So I will say that we work very hard and mostly very successfully at the IRT to make artists feel very welcome and comfortable in Indiana. And generally, we do pretty well about that. But, the one time, and I'll just come out with this, the one time a person of color, and it's happened a lot more than one time, or a queer person gets jeered at on the street in Indianapolis, it sends us back, way back. So I'm very focused on those pieces of welcome and safety and belonging so that we can continue to bring top flight artists from all over this country here and have them be comfortable. And we say to them, we want to create conditions where you can make the best art of your careers here. And remembering, Robert, that, between 70 and 85%, depending on the year, of the artists who are working here do not live here, because there's not a big enough professional theater community this isn't a big enough pool from us to hire from.
You are listening to the
Right.
Leaders and Legends podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Should mention that patriarch and chairman whom we lost, P.E. McAllister, was such a huge champion of the arts here in the
He
city.
sure was. Yeah.
And is, I'm sure, hugely missed by not only you, Janet, and the IRT, but other arts organizations as well.
Absolutely. A pioneer. Mm-hmm.
And had his own opera awards.
Yes, he did.
Typical of PE. He fell in love with something and says, okay, now how can I be more supportive than anyone else?
Yeah.
God love him.
Yeah.
Is there a particular Hoosier leader and or legend you admire most?
Oh, gosh, that's a hard question, Robert. Okay, I'll play Jeopardy with you. Living or dead?
Living. Someone you've met, someone you've interacted with. I mean, obviously, I just mentioned to me the greatest man I ever met, and that's P.E. McAllister, but there are lots of others.
So many. I don't even know where to start.
Well, I should tell. Why don't I just tell you that everyone says Jim Morris? So you can say Jim Morris, or you can say someone other than Jim Morris, or Richard Luger.
I never met Richard Luger. Sadly, I'm very sorry that I didn't, because I admire him enormously. Actually, the first person that sprang to mind, I will say, is Bart Peterson. Bart was a huge champion for the arts when he was mayor, but there have been many. Bill Hudnut was certainly a big champion for the arts. Bill Hudnut saved the IRT when it was foundering in debt in the mid 80s. There have just been so many, but I also admire long-term arts leaders from this community. So many of them. I don't know. I didn't know, Alan. I will say you're talking more about funders than anything. And I will tell you one. Here's one that's very important in my life. Margot Eccles, huge arts champion that I am fortunate enough to have had down my chair by her family. So many people. Yeah.
The Lacey's are wonderful family.
They are.
Is there a particular Hoosier artist, musician, performer whose career you followed or you think is particularly worthy of our admiration? I mean, whether it's Florence Henderson or Bill Blass or Hoagie Carmichael, Ann Baxter would probably come to mind. For me, John Cougar Mellencamp.
I'm a pretty big Hoagie Carmichael fan. It's the first play I worked on at the IRT. But I also think I'm a huge admirer of Booth Tarkington. I don't know that she would be considered an artist, but she certainly was in many ways. May Wright Sewell, some of those early suffragettes, those Indiana game changers. There's many history. I'm a huge admirer of Madam Walker. So those aren't probably entirely people that would get easily contextualized as artists, but Madam CJ was certainly an artist. Certainly an artist.
Axl Rose?
No.
David Lee Roth?
No. John Mellencamp, yes. Yeah. No.
How many times
have a rocker in that way?
How many times
David Letterman, Jane Pauley. I'll take those guys.
That's certainly true. How many times have you seen A Christmas Carol?
Seen it? Oh, thousands, Robert. Thousands.
How long have you all been putting it on?
Well, we've been doing it. We did it in two different pieces. We actually produced it from 80 to 84, and then we stopped. Then we started again in 96, and we've produced it save for the first year of COVID. So save for winter 20 every year since 96. I have directed, I don't know, a few of those, Robert. I don't know, maybe a handful. I don't really know how many I've directed. I've produced 27 of them. I've worked on all of them in one way or another. And I'll say that I fall in love with Dickens all over again every year. I'm not lying. I'm not being cute with you. I really do. I really do.
When you go to, the last time I saw a play in another theater, I saw Phantom of the Opera in London.
Okay.
And the theater was, of course, beautiful. But when I looked at the production, I was struck not because the IRT has the same quality, but because for some reason I expected the London performance to just be more. Because it's London, because it's Her Majesty's Theater and all that. When you go to see other plays, do you bring back ideas and go, hey, I want to do that?
Absolutely. It's the main reason I've gone to the theater. And in fact, I'm really curious what going to the theater is going to feel like starting next July 1st after I retire. I won't be looking at it the same way. And I'm fascinated by a number of things about that. First, I'm fascinated whether my eyes will just need a break from theater viewing. I don't know. And I'm also fascinated to see just how I will metabolize this art form I've dedicated a lot of my professional life to. I will be free of certain things, Robert. One of them is I count actors like crazy because actors are cost centers. So it's very related to budget. And I won't have to count actors anymore. When I go to theater in London and I see some big, huge thing on the West End, what I'm most depressed about is how many actors they can afford to put on stage. And that's really hard for us to put, 30 actors on stage. So I want to stop bean counting.
That's a fair point. Is there a particular genre of play that is the most popular or lucrative for the IRT? Like we must do this every year because if we don't do this, we sacrifice revenue. And there's there's watching an episode of Law and Order with my kids, and it involved some murder of this and that arts involved. And one of the guys being interviewed by the cops said, "Well, detective, there is no art without money."
True that. And in fact, murder mysteries is one of the big genres that sells, Robert, and particularly murder mysteries that have a title that people recognize. So,
my
Agatha
kids and I
Christie,
cannot wait to go to Clue.
There you go.
We can't wait to go to Clue this year.
That's why it's on this bill, man. So bring people back into the theater. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there are genres, and murder mysteries is a big one. Title recognition things, adaptations of popular fiction do well. Certain kinds of name recognizable comedies do very well. So we think of those as the sort of blockbuster titles, and we usually strive to have a couple or three of those on the bill that will bring people that may not be subscribers or in fact may never have been to the IRT before and say, oh, well, I've never been there, but I'll go see Clue, right? And that's a big piece of our programmatic engine. But in my view, those titles, and we strive to produce them beautifully, but those titles help us pick some lesser known stuff that we think people will really resonate with. And we also want to produce that.
Do you have a favorite mystery that's been put on by the IRT?
No, Robert.
Mousetrap was great.
I don't have favorite
Holmes and Watson. You don't have a favorite?
I don't. I'm such an egalitarian, and I've done this work for so long. I really don't have favorites. I do love, I'm an Anglophile. You said that word before. So I do love British murder mystery. I love Sherlock Holmes stuff. So yeah, I guess that my edge might be the British murder mystery stuff. But I also love adaptations of all kinds of literature, American and British. So
go ahead.
We're opening with Sense and Sensibility, one of my favorite novels.
Yeah, I saw that.
So very girly, but I'm hoping some men are going to come see it.
That's not a bad first date.
Not at all.
You have me laughing. I forgot.
Woman-pleasing first date. Yeah.
So the question I was going to ask is, how has the revitalization over the last 40 plus years? I've said this on several podcasts. I was born in 1967 here in Indianapolis. And when I was a kid, I only came downtown to watch not Sense and Sensibility, but Dick the Bruiser.
Ah. Okay.
There was really nothing else, a whole lot going on. But in the last several decades, all of downtown has been reborn. And how has this urban renaissance, certainly in the urban core and the mile square, helped the IRT?
Well, it certainly has, Robert, but I've also lived to see it both thrive and take some dips. And certainly from a retail perspective, now we're in a dip from COVID. There's still, in fact, I've had a friend visiting from Nashville who lived here for many years and likes to take long downtown walks because we live downtown as well. And he said, I was shocked at how much is still boarded up. And that's true. There's still since COVID, we've still got some building back to do in the urban core. But long term, what the revitalization has done that I got to tell you 40 years ago, I didn't think was ever going to happen and has beautifully is the burgeoning of downtown housing. It's like we can't build enough housing fast enough for the demand, which is amazing. So I love that. I think it gives all of us who are making arts downtown, and that certainly includes museums and symphony and us and a bunch of the smaller theaters, as well as music venues, an opportunity to really start appealing to people who can walk and ride their bikes like you. And I think we've got work to do on that. But downtown housing, I think, is a great promise for the future of downtown.
How important is it? And please describe for all the arts organizations, whether it's the symphony or the Palladium up in Carmel or other venues, other companies, to work together to get along, because the dollars are scarce. And so while I'm sure there's some competition, especially for philanthropic dollars, there's also a real sense of collegiality, I'm guessing, about promoting the Indianapolis art scene in general to the benefit of everyone.
Yeah, I have never, outside of a handful of years in New York, worked in another market, Robert. So I only understand this really from my peers around the country and other people who come to work here. The Indianapolis art scene is extremely collegial. We know each other. We support each other. We don't compete for dollars. I think hardly at all, in a negligible manner. When the Murat was about to come online, now, what was that, 25 years ago, probably, there was so much chatter about, oh my God, they're going to axe out your market share. That's not how it works. How it works in almost every community, certainly every community that I've ever heard of, is more arts makes more boats rise. Okay. And that's just how it is. It sounds very Pollyanna-ish, but the more opportunities there are for people to go to the theater, the more likely they are to look around at what other theater there is to go to. So we are extraordinarily collegial. And I will say during COVID, which is clearly a recurring theme of our conversation here, Robert, we're still in it. We're still in it.
Yeah.
And it's still very, very, very top of mind for me. The Arts Council of Indianapolis gathered us together in biweekly Zoom meetings to commiserate, to learn from one another, to figure out what best practices could be. And it was invaluable. And they also, at that point, even though it's not funded, it's not covered in their funding rubric, they invited a number of the Hamilton County folks like the Palladium to come into those conversations, because that demarcation of funding is really artificial. We share audiences with everything in Carmel. So to behave as if that happens on some other virtual plane is just silly. So I think we're very collegial. A lot of us talk all the time, even cross-disciplinarily. Could there be more collaboration? Sure, probably. But I think this is a community in large part led by the values of the Lilly Endowment to say, we want you to work together. Tell us how you can work together. And that's had decades of impact. So they've culture shaped about how we interact as well as fund us, which is unbelievable. Wonderful.
Just give a shout out to a former Leaders and Legends podcast guest, Julie Goodman, who runs the Arts Council.
Julie saved us during COVID. Seriously. She and her staff just saved us.
Explain, because I'm particularly enamored with Amanda Kingsbury, who is her comms person who used to be at the Star. Amanda's, besides being an absolutely wonderful and incredibly brilliant and fun person, she's also an East Sider living in Irvington.
Hey,
so
there you go.
She's good people just by virtue of that. But how did Julie and her team and the council? And maybe let's talk a little bit about Kira Amstutz over at the Humanities Council, because I know everybody came together. You mentioned Bart Peterson, and Kira used to work for him. Talk a little bit how you all circled the wagons.
Well, Julie simply felt that we needed to be in conversation and that we could not wait until the bewilderment had passed to get there. So literally, I think in the end of March of 2020, when, the city was utterly silent and closed down, she started convening us on Zoom. Now, the arts and culture community is aided by the fact that we have this thing called a consortium of arts professionals. So there was already a body that used to meet live that then she started convening on Zoom. And that platform has now continued for more than 2 years. We meet less often, but we continue to meet. And the Arts Council also hired a consultant. What's Sarah's last name? Oh, God. Sarah's a local lawyer and consultant who Julie hired to be our COVID information expert collector. So we didn't all have to take time to do our own research. That was a massive gift. And then just talking about the opportunity to talk and the encouragement to talk frankly about what we were all encountering was amazing. And then, of course, it made us feel less isolated and alone. And then when George Floyd was murdered, she very quickly built the conversations about race justice into the convening we were doing. And so those things existed and still exist in a lot of parallel conversation and intersecting conversation about what is it like to do this work when we all need to be convening on these issues? And it's been wonderful.
You mentioned something about the Indianapolis community coming together, both in terms of arts and other topics. Have there been particular Indianapolis artists or performers who you feel like the IRT has really helped? And does it give you a particular pride when you have an artist or have a performer who went to North Central or went to Short Ridge or wherever, and now here they're on the stage at the IRT?
It does, Robert, although I would say more often it's also transplanted Hoosiers, people who maybe came here to work and stayed for whatever reason, or who went to college in Indiana and opted to stay. But there also are a bunch of native Hoosiers whose careers I think we have helped propel, and who come to mind in that are principally actors. I'm a little trying to name names because I'll leave people out, but we're really blessed with an incredibly beautiful, albeit small, core of professional actors in this town. And it's not really been a situation where, wow, I sure wish that would have grown, because there's not enough work to keep professional theater artists working full-time in Indianapolis in their craft. But these folks, and this also extends to designers and a very small handful of directors, have opted to stay here. That moves me a lot. People who opt to adopt or stay in a community in which they were raised and give back to that community. That's not very common in our field, because our field tends to collect people in bigger markets. I grew up in the Midwest, I'm going to go use Chicago as my base, or New York as my base, or LA as my base. But people who choose, every year in and year out, to commit to making art for the community that they came up in just moves me every single day. I interact with these folks, and I interact with them every day. So
I use Jacobs School of Music. Is that in any way helpful, or is there a relationship there?
No, because they're training for principally professional opera circuit, which we are not. Of course, I use musical theater program and theater program do, but not Jacobs so much. I mean, Jacobs is a gorgeous oasis for professional singers, but it's principally singers who are being trained to go into the classical and opera markets.
We have reached the point on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Actually, I had one more question before we do the 5 questions. Have you ever, and I forgot this, but I want to ask it because my kids and I went to go see it years ago and just thought it was beyond cool. Do you ever have a play and you wonder, or want to have a play or do a performance where you're like, how in the hell are we going to do this?
Every day.
The reason I bring it up is when my kids and I came to see Dracula about 9 or 10 years ago, all we cared about is like, where are they going to get the blood? How are they going to stab the count? It was a wonderful play. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was really, really well done. But just in general, when it comes to quote unquote special effects and stuff like that, and do you actually get to help shred the grocery bags that create the snow for...
No. And I'm very glad
Christmas
I never
Carol.
have to. We buy that snow in boxes from a distributor who distributes principally to department store window dressing. But there's only one company who still does it. I'm knocking on wood right now, because if they go out of business, Robert, we are screwed. Every single day, I'm involved in conversations about how in the hell are we going to do that? And that's part of what makes it really fun work, is there's a challenge, not just once a month, but once a day. And we're lucky if it's only one. So we're constantly trying to figure out, how can we make this cool idea that a director or designer had work? I just came from a 4-hour design meeting with a bunch of people from Philly and New York, and they're throwing out ideas, and the production manager and I are sitting there going, wow, that is so cool. I hope we can figure out how to make that work. So every single day. Yeah.
There was one play, I forget, it was one of the mystery plays where the set was a house, and I saw it. It wasn't The Mousetrap, I don't think. It wasn't Holmes and Watson. It was before then. It's the play where you invited people to come try on the costumes. My kids and I came, and I forget the name of it, but I saw it 3 times, and every time the curtain was parted, the crowd gasped.
Yeah, we love that.
I would bet.
Yeah. Yeah. And, here's another just real kicker of COVID. Our union regulations now will not allow audiences on stage. So you can't come touch the stuff. We hope that's going to change in the next few months, but it hasn't yet. And that's not our dreaming. It's union regulations trying to keep artists safe.
Sure.
Yeah. I love it when audiences gasp. And actually, we're going to put a curtain in a show this year for the first time in a while for that express purpose. It's fun to get audiences to go, wow. So anytime we do, the last show we did before COVID, which we didn't finish, we threw onto film, was Murder on the Orient Express, which had a donut turntable, really cool interlocking turntable. Loved that thing. Audiences applauded every time that thing moved. We loved it.
My kids and I were supposed to go the night after it shut down. We missed that one.
Well, I just got to put a tiny plug in for WFYI. Those guys saved our bacon for 2 years because they filmed everything we did, and it allowed us to get it out on Broadway on demand and continue to make art, keep people employed, keep our audiences entertained. They were just huge, great collaborators.
Wonderful. Again, more stories of Hoosiers and residents of Indianapolis coming together.
Indeed.
We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Janet Allen, are you ready?
I am, and I'm terrified. What are they?
You'll get an A, I promise. What was your first job?
Babysitting.
What was your first concert?
Three Dog Night.
Oh, that's strong. That's good.
You don't even remember Three Dog Night. I'm so much older than you are, Robert.
Well, my brothers and sisters are all 10 years older than me. So yes, I remember stuff like that on 8-track. Three Dog Night.
Yeah.
I want bell bottoms.
Oh God, yes. Love them. Don't have any anymore, but loved them back in the day. Yeah.
Did you take your pet rock?
No, I didn't do a pet rock.
You could see, that's my favorite question of the 5 questions, just because the concerts are too funny. If
they tell you a lot, don't they? Yeah,
they do. And sometimes I actually know the answer because I know the person whom I'm interviewing. And so it makes it even more fun, but we've had some really good ones. My favorite remains Greg Ballard, who was a huge champion of the arts, obviously, whose first concert was Sly and the Family Stone in Indiana University.
Well done.
If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you choose?
The Complete Works of Shakespeare. Too true to form, right?
Yeah, exactly. There was a really good Shakespeare play put on by the IRT about 7 years ago. Guess I had the dog, and I can't think of the name of it.
Two Gentlemen of Verona.
That is correct. The dog was the star of the show, of course.
Well, in some ways, that dog steals those scenes for every time that play's been produced for 200 years. Yeah. more than 200, 400. Yeah.
If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
That one's really hard. I'm going to say the first time that Shakespeare's company played for Queen Elizabeth I.
If you could have dinner with anyone living today, I'll make it easy. Living today, 2 hours off the record to talk about anything you want, whom would you choose?
Michelle Obama.
Well, her husband is the most popular answer.
I bet he is. And I almost went there, but I got to say that I'm a big fan of his, but I think I would also love to talk to her about parenting daughters. I have 2 daughters.
Oh, it's a joy, isn't it?
It is, actually. It's not easy every day. Yeah.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been Janet Allen. She is the Margot Lacey Eccles Artistic Director at the Indiana Repertory Theater. And after nearly 40 years of service, she is retiring after this season. I can tell you this, there's no sweeter, no nicer, more pleasant, more fun person I've ever met in this city. Janet, you've always been really kind to me. I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast, and enjoy your retirement. And I hope that you'll let me buy you some cinnamon toast at Patashu soon.
Woohoo! You're on, man. Robert, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.
This podcast was produced and edited by Chris Spangle and Leaders and Legends LLC. If you're interested in starting a podcast or taking yours to the next level, please contact us at leadersandlegends.net.